The stagecoach lurched to a stop in front of the Bodie, California General Store, and Julia Owens stepped down into the dust with nothing but the tattered dress on her back, and a shame so heavy it felt like iron chains around her neck. The late afternoon sun of August 1878 beat down mercilessly on the mining town, and she could already feel eyes turning toward her, sizing her up, judging what they saw. She kept her gaze lowered, her dark hair falling forward to hide the bruise that still colored her cheekbone purple and yellow, a parting gift from the man she had finally fled 3 days ago in Carson City. The town bustled with activity. Miners trudged past covered in dust, their faces weathered and hard. Women in proper bonnets crossed to the other side of the street when they saw her disheveled appearance. Julia clutched the small bundle that contained everything she had managed to grab before running, her hands trembling despite the heat. She had no money, no family, nowhere to go. The stage driver had only agreed to bring her this far because she had traded her mother's wedding ring for passage, the last thing of value she owned. "You planning on standing there all day, miss?" the driver called down, already anxious to move on. Julia forced her feet to move, stepping up onto the wooden boardwalk. She needed work, food, shelter. The shame of what she had endured, what people would assume about a woman arriving alone in such a state, burned through her chest. In Carson City, they had whispered. They had called her a fool for marrying Thomas Brennan, for staying when the hitting started, for not having anywhere else to turn. Now she was truly alone, and the weight of it threatened to crush her. She approached the general store, hoping perhaps they needed help, but the woman behind the counter took one look at her and shook her head firmly. "We do not employ your kind here, my kind." Julia's voice came out smaller than she intended. "Madam, I am just looking for honest work." "Honest?" The woman's lips pressed into a thin line. "A woman arrives in town looking like that, alone with nothing. We know what that means. Try the saloon if you are looking for employment." The words struck like a physical blow. Julia backed away, her eyes stinging with tears she refused to let fall. She moved down the street, trying 2 more establishments, receiving the same cold rejection each time. The sun was beginning its descent toward the Sierra Nevada peaks in the distance, and desperation clawed at her throat. That was when she noticed the man loading supplies onto a sturdy pack mule at the edge of town. He stood well over 6 feet tall, with broad shoulders that strained against his worn flannel shirt. His dark hair was longer than fashionable, touching his collar, and a thick beard covered the lower half of his face. He moved with the easy confidence of someone comfortable in his own skin, someone who had no need to impress anyone. As Julia watched, he hefted a 100-pound sack of flour like it weighed nothing, securing it to the mule's pack. She should not approach him. A strange man, clearly living outside of town based on his supplies. But the sun was getting lower and she had nowhere to sleep, nothing to eat. The shame she carried was nothing compared to the fear of spending the night on the street in a mining town full of rough men far from civilization. Julia forced herself to walk toward him, each step requiring more courage than the last. "Excuse me, sir." The man turned, and she found herself looking into the most striking blue eyes she had ever seen. They were the color of a high mountain lake, clear and piercing. His gaze traveled over her, taking in her appearance without the judgment she had seen in every other face today. His expression remained neutral, waiting. "I apologize for disturbing you," she began, her voice shaking. "I am looking for work, any kind of work. I can cook, clean, mend clothes. I do not require much, just a place to sleep and food. I am a hard worker, I promise you that." He studied her for a long moment, and she saw him notice the bruise, the way her dress was torn at the shoulder, the absence of any baggage. "What is your name?" "Julia Owens." "Where did you come from?" "Julia Owens, Carson City." "And what brought you to Bodie?" This was the question she had been dreading. The truth sat bitter on her tongue, but she could not bring herself to lie. "I was married to a man who used his fists more than his words. 3 days ago, I decided I would rather die on the road than spend another night under his roof. So I left with nothing but what I am wearing. I sold my mother's ring to get this far, and now I have nothing and no one. I need work, sir. I will do anything honest to earn my keep." The man's expression did not change, but something flickered in those blue eyes. He returned to checking his mule's pack, and Julia's heart sank. Another rejection. She should have expected it. "I live up in the mountains," he said finally, not looking at her. "About 2 hours' ride from here. It is isolated, just me and the wilderness. I do my own cooking and cleaning, so I have no real need for help. I understand." Julia tried to keep the despair from her voice. "Thank you for your time." She had turned to leave when his voice stopped her. "But winter is coming in a few months, and it would not hurt to have someone help me put up extra stores. Someone to mend my clothes before they fall apart completely. Someone who can make a proper meal instead of the slop I usually eat." Julia spun back around, hardly daring to hope. The man finally looked at her directly. "I am not asking questions about your past. I am not making assumptions about who you are or what you have done. If you want work, I will give you work. You will have your own room, proper food, and I will pay you a fair wage. But I live by one rule up there. Your past stays outside. You leave whatever shame or pain you are carrying at the door. Inside my home, you are just Julia, and you are welcome at my table. Is that understood?" The tears Julia had been holding back finally spilled over. She nodded, not trusting her voice. "My name is Russell Owens," he said, extending a calloused hand. "Though most people call me Russ." Julia took his hand, noting they shared a surname by coincidence. His grip was firm but gentle, and she felt the strength in those fingers. Strength that could hurt, but somehow she knew it would not. "Thank you," she whispered. "You have no idea what this means. Get your things together and we will head out. I want to make it home before full dark. This is everything I have." She indicated the small bundle in her other hand. Russ nodded, showing no surprise or pity. "Then let us go. Can you ride?" "Yes, sir. Just Russ is fine." He moved to a nearby hitching post where a large roan gelding waited patiently. With easy movements, he untied the horse and swung up into the saddle. Then he extended his hand down to Julia. "You will ride with me. The mule will follow." Julia hesitated only a moment before taking his hand. He pulled her up behind him with such ease that she barely had to use her own strength. She settled on the horse's back, acutely aware of how close she was to this stranger, this man who had shown her more kindness in 5 minutes than she had received in the last 5 years. "Hold on," Russ said, and she wrapped her arms around his waist, feeling the solid warmth of him through his shirt. They rode out of Bodie as the sun painted the sky gold and orange. Julia looked back once at the town that had rejected her, then turned her face forward, toward the mountains rising dark and majestic against the sky. Whatever waited for her in those peaks, it had to be better than what she was leaving behind. The trail wound upward through pine forests that smelled of resin and earth. The air grew cooler as they climbed, a welcome relief from the valley heat. Russ guided the horse with an expert hand, taking switchbacks at a steady pace that did not tire the animal. The mule followed faithfully behind, its bell jingling softly in the growing twilight. Julia found herself relaxing against Russ's back, lulled by the rhythmic motion of the horse and the peaceful sounds of the wilderness. No angry voices, no breaking glass or slamming doors. just the whisper of wind through pine needles and the call of a distant bird. "How long have you lived up here?" she asked, her first word since they had left town. 7 years, Russ replied, his deep voice rumbling through his chest where she pressed against him. "I came west from Pennsylvania after the war. Tried my hand at mining in Bodie for a while, but I am not built for working underground. Too much sky and space in my blood. Found this place and decided to stay." "What do you do for income?" "Trap in the winter. Hunt and sell meat to the restaurants in Bodie. I have a good vegetable garden and I trade what I grow. I guide hunters who come from back east, though I do not get many this far out. It is enough. I do not need much." They crested a ridge and Julia gasped. Before them lay a small valley cradled between peaks, and in the center sat a cabin that looked like it had grown from the mountain itself. Built from solid logs chinked with clay, it was larger than she had expected, with a stone chimney rising from one end and a covered porch across the front. A barn stood nearby, and she could see the neat rows of a garden plot behind it. A stream glinted silver in the last light, running past the property before disappearing into the trees. "It is beautiful," Julia breathed. "It is home." There was satisfaction in Russ's voice, pride in what he had built. They descended into the valley as darkness settled in earnest. By the time they reached the cabin, stars were beginning to appear in the deepening blue above. Russ dismounted and helped Julia down, then began unloading the mule with practiced efficiency. "Head inside," he told her. "There should be enough coals in the fireplace to get a flame going. I will be in once I have seen to the animals." Julia pushed open the heavy wooden door and stepped into what would be her new home. The interior was dim, but she could make out a large main room with a stone fireplace dominating one wall. She found matches on the mantel and coaxed the coals back to life, adding kindling until flames caught and spread warmth and light through the space. As the fire grew, she took in her surroundings. The cabin was simply but solidly furnished. A table with 4 chairs sat near the kitchen area. A worn but comfortable-looking sofa faced the fireplace. Shelves lined one wall, filled with books, which surprised her. The kitchen was well equipped with an iron stove, pots and pans hanging from hooks, and supplies neatly organized. Everything was clean but clearly lacked a woman's touch. Functional rather than homey. 2 doors led off the main room. Julia did not investigate, not wanting to presume. The front door opened and Russ entered carrying several of the supply sacks. He brought them to the kitchen area and set them down, then returned outside for more. On his 3rd trip, he closed the door firmly and shot the bolt. "Your room is through there." He indicated the door on the right. "It has a proper bed and a chest for your things, such as they are. I will bring you some of my mother's old dresses tomorrow. I kept them stored in the barn. They might need taking in, but they are whole and clean. You do not have to do that. I do if I expect you to work. You cannot mend clothes while wearing the only dress you own." His tone was matter-of-fact, not unkind. He moved to the kitchen and began unpacking supplies. "Are you hungry?" Julia's stomach chose that moment to growl loudly. She could not remember the last time she had eaten. Russ glanced at her with what might have been amusement in his eyes. "I will take that as a yes. Go get settled. Wash up if you like. There is a basin and pitcher in your room, fresh water. Supper will be ready soon." Julia wanted to offer to help, but she was suddenly so tired she could barely stand. The adrenaline that had carried her through the last 3 days was fading, leaving exhaustion in its wake. She nodded and moved to the door he had indicated. The room was small but lovely. A bed with a real mattress and quilt sat against one wall. A chest of drawers stood opposite, with a mirror hanging above it. A washstand held a pitcher and basin, as promised, along with clean towels. A single window looked out toward the stream and white curtains hung on either side. It was simple and clean and hers. Julia set her bundle on the bed and moved to the washstand. The water was cold and clear. She scrubbed her face and hands, wincing when she touched the bruise on her cheek. In the small mirror, she barely recognized herself. Hollow-eyed and pale, her dark hair tangled and dull. When had she become this person? You are not that person anymore, she told herself firmly. That life is outside. This is a new start. She did the best she could to tidy her hair, then returned to the main room. Russ had coffee brewing and was frying bacon in a large skillet. The smell made her mouth water. "Sit," he said, nodding toward the table. Julia sat, watching as he moved around the kitchen with surprising grace for such a large man. He scrambled eggs in the bacon fat, cut thick slices of bread from a loaf, and somehow managed to have everything ready at the same moment. He placed a full plate in front of her, along with a cup of coffee, then sat down across from her with his own meal. For a moment, Julia just stared at the food, more than she had seen on a plate in recent memory. "Eat," Russ said gently. "You look like you need it." She did not need to be told twice. The food was simple but delicious, and she had to force herself to eat slowly to not make herself sick. Russ ate steadily, not watching her but not ignoring her either, a comfortable presence across the table. When she finally set down her fork, too full to take another bite, she found him studying her with those clear blue eyes. "Thank you," she said, "for the food, for bringing me here, for not asking questions." "Everyone has a past," Russ said quietly. "Most of us came west to escape something. Your past is your business unless you choose to share it. All I care about is who you are moving forward." "Who I am moving forward." Julia tested the words, finding them strange in her mouth. "I am not sure I know who that is anymore. You will figure it out. Time and peace have a way of helping a person find themselves again." He stood and began clearing the plates. "You should get some sleep. Tomorrow will be a full day. I will show you around, explain what needs doing." Julia rose to help with the dishes, but Russ waved her off. "Tomorrow. Tonight you rest." She wanted to argue to prove her worth, but exhaustion pulled at her like a heavy blanket. "Good night, Russ, and thank you, truly." "Good night, Julia." She retreated to her small room and closed the door. In the darkness, she undressed down to her chemise and crawled between sheets that smelled of soap and sun. The mattress was soft, the quilts warm. Through the window, she could see stars brighter than she had ever imagined, and she could hear the distant murmur of the stream. For the first time in years, Julia Owens felt safe. And as sleep claimed her, she did not dream of fists and angry words, but of clear blue eyes and a quiet voice saying your past stays outside. Morning came with birdsong and sunlight streaming through the window. Julia woke slowly, confused for a moment about where she was. Then memory flooded back and she sat up quickly, noting the angle of the light. She had slept late. Russ would think her lazy. She dressed hurriedly in her wrinkled dress and emerged to find the main room empty. The fire had been built up and a pot of coffee sat warming on the stove. Through the window, she could see Russ working in the garden, a large basket beside him. Julia poured herself coffee and stepped out onto the porch. The morning air was crisp and clean, scented with pine and wildflowers. The valley spread before her in shades of green and gold, the peaks rising majestically all around. It was breathtakingly beautiful. Russ looked up from his work and straightened, wiping his hands on his pants. He crossed to the cabin with long strides, carrying the basket now full of vegetables. "Morning," he said. "There is bread and butter inside. Help yourself." "I am sorry I slept so late. I did not mean to be lazy. You needed the rest. No apologies necessary." He set the basket on the porch. "Eat something, then I will show you around properly." After a breakfast of bread and butter washed down with strong coffee, Russ gave Julia a tour of the property. The garden was extensive, with late-season vegetables still producing. The barn housed 2 horses including the roan from yesterday, a milk cow, and several chickens in a coop. "The cow needs milking twice a day," Russ explained. "The chickens need feeding and eggs collected. I usually take care of the horses. They can be temperamental." "I am good with horses," Julia offered. "I grew up on a farm in Missouri before my parents died." Russ nodded, filing away this small piece of her history. "Then you can help with them if you like." He showed her the root cellar where he stored preserved foods and kept things cool. The woodshed was stacked high, but he explained he would be cutting more once the weather cooled. There was a smokehouse for preserving meat, and a small building he used as a workshop for repairing equipment and tools. "I go into town every 2 weeks for supplies I cannot grow or make myself," he said. "You are welcome to come along or stay here, whichever you prefer." "I think I would prefer to stay here, if that is acceptable." "Perfectly acceptable." His tone suggested he understood her reluctance to face the judgment of town again so soon. They spent the rest of the day working companionably. Russ brought out the dresses he had mentioned, and Julia was touched by how carefully he had stored them. They had belonged to his mother, he explained, who had passed 5 years ago. His father had died in the war, and his mother had insisted on coming west with him despite her poor health. "She loved it here," Russ said, a distant look in his eyes. "Said the mountains made her feel closer to heaven. She had 2 good years before her heart gave out." Julia held one of the dresses up, a simple blue cotton that would be perfect for daily wear. "Are you certain you want me to have these?" She would be glad to see them worn rather than collecting dust. He cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable with the emotion in his voice. "I will leave you to try them on. There is thread and a sewing kit in the drawer of that chest if they need altering." The dresses fit reasonably well with some minor adjustments. Julia spent the afternoon at the kitchen table with her sewing kit, taking in seams and hemming skirts, while Russ worked on repairing a broken fence in the pasture. The domestic piece of it all was surreal. The quiet industry, the absence of tension or fear. She had to remind herself this was real, that she was truly here. That evening, Julia insisted on cooking supper. She made a simple stew with the vegetables from the garden and some dried beef from the stores, along with biscuits that turned out better than she had dared hope. When she set the food on the table, Russ looked genuinely impressed. "This is the best meal I have had in years," he said after the first bite. "You are being kind." "I am being honest. I told you my cooking was slop. This is wonderful." Julia felt warmth spread through her chest at the simple praise. When was the last time anyone had appreciated something she had done? They fell into a routine over the following weeks. Julia rose early to milk the cow and collect eggs while Russ tended the horses. She cooked breakfast and they ate together, planning the day's work over coffee. The days were full but not overwhelming. There was always something to do, but the work had a purpose and rhythm that Julia found deeply satisfying. She mended all of Russ's clothes, amazed at the state they had been in. She organized the cabin, adding small touches that made it feel more like a home. Wildflowers in a jar on the table, curtains for the kitchen window. She began baking bread twice a week, and the smell of it filled the cabin with warmth. Russ was a quiet man by nature, but Julia found she appreciated that. He did not pry or push for conversation, but when they did talk, he listened with his full attention. He was kind without being soft, strong without being harsh. She found herself relaxing around him, the constant tension she had carried for so long gradually easing from her shoulders. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sun set, Russ asked his first personal question since bringing her home. "Do you have anyone who might come looking for you?" Anyone I should be aware of? Julia had been expecting this question eventually. "My husband might try. Thomas Brennan. He is a clerk in Carson City, works at the assayer's office. He will be angry that I left, but I do not think he will search too hard. I was more of a possession than a wife to him, and he can easily replace me with some other unfortunate woman. If he does come, I will handle it." There was steel in Russ's voice, and Julia glanced at him. In the fading light, his profile was strong and serious. "I do not want to bring trouble to your door. Your past stays outside, remember. That includes any trouble that might come from it. You are under my roof now, which means you are under my protection." He looked at her directly. "I mean that, Julia. No one will hurt you here." The fierceness in his voice made her throat tight. "Why are you being so kind to me? You do not know me. I could be anyone. I know enough." Russ returned his gaze to the sunset. "I know you are brave enough to leave a bad situation even with nowhere to go. I know you work hard and do not complain. I know you are kind to the animals and you hum when you bake bread and you think I do not notice. That is enough." Julia did not know what to say to that, so she said nothing. But something shifted in her chest, like a door opening just a crack to let in light. As August faded into September, the aspens on the mountainside began to turn gold. The air grew crisper, especially in the mornings and evenings. Russ began preparing in earnest for winter, cutting and stacking firewood, hunting deer and elk to smoke for the cold months ahead. Julia helped where she could, preserving vegetables, rendering fat, making sure their stores would see them through when the snow came. It was during this time that she began to truly know Russell Owens. She learned he had been a scout during the war, which explained his ease in the wilderness. He could track anything, read signs in nature that were invisible to her. He was an expert marksman and an even better woodsman. But she also learned he loved books. In the evenings, he would read by firelight, everything from Shakespeare to botanical texts to dime novels. He had a dry sense of humor that caught her off guard with its unexpected wit. He was patient to a fault, taking time to teach her skills she had never learned, from dressing game to identifying animal tracks. And he was unfailingly gentle, with the animals, with the land, with her. His hands, so large and calloused, could be surprisingly tender. She noticed it in the way he handled injured creatures, the way he touched the plants in his garden, the way he passed her items carefully so their fingers would not accidentally brush. That last part made Julia wonder. He was scrupulously careful never to touch her unnecessarily, always maintaining a respectful distance. She told herself it was proper, that she should appreciate his propriety. But sometimes, in the close quarters of the cabin, she found herself wishing he would stand a little nearer, that his hand would linger a moment longer when passing her things. The realization that she was attracted to Russ came gradually, then all at once. She was hanging laundry on the line behind the cabin when she heard the sound of an axe biting into wood. She glanced over to see Russ splitting logs for the woodpile, his sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms corded with muscle. Sweat dampened his shirt despite the cool air, and his movements had the practiced rhythm of someone who had done this work 1,000 times. Julia found herself staring, her hands stilling on the shirt she was hanging. There was something deeply appealing about his competence, his strength tempered with gentleness. And when he paused to wipe his brow and happened to look her way, catching her watching him, the small smile that touched his lips made her heart flutter in a way it had never done before. She turned back to her laundry quickly, feeling heat in her cheeks that had nothing to do with the sun. This was dangerous territory. Russ had offered her shelter and work, nothing more. She should not complicate matters with feelings he likely did not share. But the feelings, once acknowledged, would not be ignored. She found herself watching for his return when he went hunting. She took extra care with the meals she prepared, pleased when he asked for seconds. She laughed more readily at his quiet jokes. And at night, lying in her small bed, she found herself thinking about the wall that separated their rooms and wondering if he ever thought of her the way she was increasingly thinking of him. October arrived with the first real cold snap. Russ went into town for what might be the last supply run before heavy snow made the trail impassable. This time, Julia accompanied him despite her previous reluctance. She needed thread and a few personal items, and after 2 months on the mountain, she felt stronger, more able to face any whispers. The ride down was pleasant, the aspens blazing gold against the deep green of the pines. Russ kept up a steady commentary about the terrain, pointing out game trails and landmarks. Julia found herself relaxing against his back in a way that felt natural now, her arms around his waist without the awkwardness of that first ride. Bodie was as rough and busy as she remembered, but this time, Julia walked through town with her head high. She was respectably dressed, arriving with a known local man, and no one gave her a second glance. They split up to make their purchases more quickly, agreeing to meet at the general store in an hour. Julia was examining thread colors when a man's voice made her blood run cold. Julia. Julia Brennan. She turned slowly to find Thomas standing in the doorway of the store. He looked the same as always. Average height, thinning brown hair, a weak chin concealed by a thin beard. Eyes that could turn from charming to cold in an instant. Those eyes were cold now. "I thought that was you," Thomas said, his voice tight with suppressed anger. 2 months you have been gone. 2 months I have been looking for you." "I am not coming back," Julia said, proud that her voice remained steady. "You are my wife. You will do as I say." He stepped forward, reaching for her arm. Julia stepped back. "Do not touch me. You will come with me right now, or I will make a scene the likes of which this town has never forgotten." The lady said not to touch her. Both Julia and Thomas turned to find Russ standing in the doorway, blocking the light. He looked even larger than usual in the confined space of the store, and there was something dangerous in his eyes that Julia had never seen before. Thomas sized him up, trying to maintain his bluster. "This is none of your concern. This is my wife, and she is coming home with me. She is not going anywhere she does not want to go." Russ's voice was quiet, but it carried absolute certainty. "Who do you think you are? You cannot interfere between a man and his wife. I am the man she works for. I am the man whose home she lives in, and I am the man telling you to leave her alone." Thomas's face flushed red. "She is my property under the law. She is a person, not property, and she already told you no." Russ took a step into the store, and Thomas actually backed up. "I suggest you head back to Carson City and forget you ever saw her. Because if you try to take her against her will, you will have to go through me. And I promise you, that will not end well." For a moment, Julia thought Thomas would push the issue. His hands clenched into fists, and she recognized the signs of his temper building. But something in Russ's steady, dangerous calm seemed to penetrate even Thomas's anger. He was not a brave man when facing someone who could fight back. "You can have her," Thomas spat. "She was never worth the trouble anyway. A cold, useless woman. Good riddance." He stormed out of the store, and Julia sagged against the counter, her legs suddenly weak. Russ was at her side immediately, his hand gentle on her elbow. "Are you all right?" Julia nodded, then shook her head, then found herself fighting tears. "I am sorry. I should have warned you he might be here. You have nothing to apologize for." Russ guided her to a chair the shopkeeper hurriedly provided. "Sit for a moment, catch your breath." "That was my husband," Thomas. He is not a good man, but he is not usually foolish enough to back down that easily. I am worried he might try something. Let him try. Russ's voice was grim. I meant what I said. He will have to go through me. Julia looked up at him, at the protective stance, the concern in his blue eyes. Why are you doing this? Why do you care so much? The question seemed to catch Russ off guard. He crouched down so he was at her eye level, and his expression softened. Because you matter, Julia. You deserve to be safe and respected. Any decent man would do the same. But Julia had known many men in her life, and none of them would have stood up for her the way Russ just had. Not any man, she said softly. You are a good man, Russell Owens. Something passed between them in that moment, an understanding that had been building for weeks. Russ reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and gently touched the place on her cheek where the bruise had finally faded. His fingers were warm and calloused and incredibly gentle. No one will hurt you again, he said. I swear it. Julia believed him. And more than that, she realized with startling clarity that she was falling in love with him. Perhaps had been falling for weeks now, in the quiet moments of working side by side, in the peaceful evenings on the porch, in the way he made her feel valued and safe and seen. They finished their shopping in a subdued mood and headed back up the mountain. Russ kept the horse at a faster pace than usual, clearly wanting to put distance between them and town. Julia held on tight, resting her cheek against his broad back, letting his solid presence comfort her. That night, after supper had been eaten and cleaned up, Russ built up the fire against the cold and poured them both coffee. Julia sat on the sofa, and after a moment's hesitation, Russ joined her rather than taking his usual chair. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the flames dance. I was married before, Russ said suddenly. Not for long. We were young just before the war. She died of fever while I was away scouting. I came home to find her buried 3 months. Julia turned to look at him, seeing the old pain in his eyes. For a long time I thought I would never care for anyone that way again, he continued. It hurt too much to lose her, so I came out here, built this place, kept to myself. It was easier alone. What changed? Julia asked softly. Russ looked at her, and the intensity in his gaze made her breath catch. You arrived in Bodie looking lost and brave and so determined not to break, and I knew I could not just walk away. I told myself I was just offering you work, a place to stay, but that was not all it was. Not even from the beginning. Julia's heart was pounding so hard she was sure he must hear it. What was it then? I do not know exactly. I just know that these past 2 months have been the best I have had in 7 years. Coming home to a warm cabin and good food and your smile. Working beside you during the day and talking with you in the evening. Watching you heal and grow stronger. Watching you laugh. He set down his coffee and turned to face her fully. I am not good with words, Julia. I do not know how to say this properly, but I have come to care for you deeply. More than I should, maybe, given our arrangement. If that makes you uncomfortable, I apologize. But after today, after seeing that man and knowing he hurt you, I realized I cannot keep pretending what I feel is just friendship or simple concern. Julia could hardly breathe. What do you feel? I think I am falling in love with you. The words came out rough, unpracticed, but utterly sincere. I know it is too soon. I know you might not feel the same way. You have been through so much and you might need more time, or you might never feel that way about me at all. But I needed you to know. I needed you to understand that you are not just my employee. You are not just someone I am helping. You have become everything to me, and if Thomas or anyone else comes for you, they will have to kill me to take you away. Tears spilled down Julia's cheeks, but they were not tears of sadness. It is not too soon, she whispered. And I do feel the same way. I have been trying not to, trying to keep my feelings to myself because I thought you were just being kind. But Russ, I am falling in love with you too. You make me feel safe and valued and cherished in a way I have never felt before. When I am with you, I am not broken or damaged or shameful. I am just Julia, and that is the greatest gift anyone has ever given me. Russ reached out and cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs gently wiping away her tears. You were never broken, never damaged, never shameful. You are strong and beautiful and good, and anyone who made you feel otherwise was a fool and a liar. Then he kissed her, and it was nothing like the hard, demanding kisses Thomas had forced on her. This was gentle and questioning, giving her every opportunity to pull away. But Julia did not pull away. She leaned into the kiss, her hands coming up to rest on his chest, feeling the strong beat of his heart beneath her palms. When they finally parted, both breathless, Russ rested his forehead against hers. I want to do this right. I want to court you properly. I know you are technically still married, but that man does not deserve the title of husband. When you are ready, we can look into ending that marriage legally. And if you will have me when you are free, I would like to make you my wife in truth. Julia laughed through her happy tears. I would like that very much, though I hope you know you have been courting me all along. Every kindness, every shared meal, every evening spent together. You have already shown me what love should look like. They stayed up late that night, talking by the fire. Julia told him more about her life before Thomas, about growing up on a farm with parents who loved each other, about losing them to influenza when she was 19, about making the mistake of marrying the first man who offered security, not realizing until too late what kind of man he really was. Russ told her more about his time in the war, the friends he had lost, the things he had seen that still haunted him, about his brief, bright marriage and the darkness that followed his wife's death, about finding this place and slowly building a life that felt worth living. And they talked about the future, about the winter coming, which they would face together, about spring and what they might plant in the garden, about the possibility of children someday if they were blessed, about growing old in this mountain valley, surrounded by peace and beauty and love. When Julia finally retired to her room in the early hours of the morning, she fell asleep with a smile on her face and warmth in her heart that had nothing to do with the quilts piled on her bed. The first snow came in early November, transforming the valley into a wonderland of white. Russ had been right about winter in the mountains. The snow fell heavy and deep, sometimes lasting for days. But they were well prepared, and the cabin was snug and warm. They spent long evenings by the fire, Russ reading aloud while Julia mended or knitted. Sometimes they just talked, sharing stories and dreams, learning the thousand small details that make up a life. Russ was teaching her to read animal tracks in the snow, to predict weather patterns, to identify edible and medicinal plants. Julia was teaching him to cook beyond simple survival meals, to appreciate small touches that made a house a home, to let himself be cared for after so many years of solitude. They were careful with each other, mindful of propriety and Julia's still married status. But they stole kisses in the barn while feeding the animals. They held hands on the porch watching the sun set. They sat close by the fire, shoulders touching, heads sometimes leaning together in comfortable intimacy. In late November, Russ made the difficult journey to Bodie and returned with news. He had found a lawyer willing to help Julia file for divorce from Thomas on grounds of cruelty and abandonment. It would take time, possibly until spring, but it could be done. Julia signed the papers with a shaking hand, officially ending the worst chapter of her life. That night, she and Russ celebrated quietly with a good meal and apple pie she had made from their stores. It was a small thing, but it felt momentous. the first step toward a future they could build together. December brought the hardest weather. Snow drifted high against the cabin walls, and some days it was impossible to do more than tend the animals in the barn and hurry back inside. But Julia found she did not mind. The enforced closeness with Russ was a blessing rather than a burden. They moved around each other easily in the cabin's confines, as natural as if they had been together for years rather than months. On Christmas morning, Julia woke to find Russ had already been up for hours. The cabin was warm and filled with the scent of coffee and bacon. A small pine tree stood in the corner, decorated with strings of berries and paper ornaments folded with careful precision. "Merry Christmas," Russ said, looking almost shy. "I know it is not much, but I wanted to mark the day." Julia was speechless. No one had given her a Christmas in years. "It is beautiful, perfect. I have something for you." He produced a small package wrapped in cloth. "It is not fancy." Inside was a book, Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen, Julia's favorite, though she had never owned a copy. She looked at him in wonder. "How did you know?" "You mentioned it once, months ago. I sent away for it the next time I was in town." He looked uncertain. "Do you like it?" "I love it." Julia threw her arms around his neck, hugging him tightly. "Thank you. This is the best gift I have ever received." She had a gift for him, too. A new shirt she had been secretly sewing for weeks from fabric she had found in his mother's things. She had embroidered his initials on the cuff, a small detail she hoped he would appreciate. When he opened it, his face softened with emotion. "Julia, this is too fine. You must have spent hours on this. You deserve fine things. You deserve to be cared for." She helped him try it on, and it fit perfectly. Standing back to look at him, she felt a surge of love so strong it made her chest ache. Russ caught her looking and pulled her close. "I love you," he said simply. "I know I have said it before, but I want to make sure you hear it. I love you, Julia Owens. I love your strength and your kindness and your laugh. I love the way you hum when you work and the way you scrunch your nose when you are thinking hard about something. I love you, and I want to spend every day for the rest of my life making sure you know how precious you are." "I love you too," Julia whispered, tears stinging her eyes again. Happy tears this time, grateful tears. "I never knew it could be like this. Love, I mean. Real love." He kissed her then, slow and sweet, and the world narrowed to just the two of them in their warm cabin with snow falling softly outside. January and February passed in a blur of contentment. The deep snows kept them mostly isolated, but they did not mind. They had each other, and that was enough. Julia found herself thinking less and less about the past. The memories were still there, but they had lost their sharp edges. The nightmares that had plagued her first weeks on the mountain had faded entirely. When she looked in the mirror now, she saw herself again. Not perfect, but whole. In early March, a late-season storm swept through, dropping 2 feet of new snow. But it proved to be winter's last gasp. By the middle of the month, the snow was melting rapidly, swelling the streams and revealing patches of earth. The first brave flowers pushed through the snow in sheltered spots. And one afternoon, a rider appeared at their valley, bringing news from town. Julia's divorce had been finalized. She was free. Russ read the letter from the lawyer 3 times as if he could not quite believe it. Then he looked at Julia with such hope and joy that she laughed out loud. "Does this mean what I think it means?" he asked. "I am no longer married. I am free to make my own choices." Julia took the letter from his hands and set it aside. Then she took both his hands in hers. "And I choose you, Russell Owens, if you will still have me, still have you." Russ pulled her into his arms, lifting her off her feet and spinning her around. "Julia, I have been waiting for this moment since the day I met you. Will you marry me? Properly, legally, before God and anyone else who cares to witness?" "Yes," Julia said, laughing and crying at the same time. Yes, of course, yes. He kissed her soundly, and for a long moment they just held each other, reveling in the joy of it. Free. Together. Home. They were married in April when the wildflowers carpeted the valley in colors too beautiful to describe. A preacher came up from Bodie along with a few of Russ's friends from town. Julia wore a dress she had made herself from fabric Russ had bought on a special trip to town, a soft green that matched the spring aspens. Russ wore the shirt she had made him for Christmas. The ceremony took place on their porch with the mountains rising majestically all around. Julia spoke her vows with a clear, strong voice, meaning every word. To love and cherish in sickness and health, for richer or poorer. This time, the vows were not a trap but a promise she was eager to make. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Russ kissed her like she was the most precious thing in the world. Because to him, she was. The celebration afterward was simple but joyful. Julia had prepared a feast from their stores, and they ate and drank and laughed with their small gathering of guests. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, the guests began the journey back down to town, leaving the newlyweds to their first night as a married couple. Julia stood on the porch watching the last of their guests disappear down the trail. Then she felt Russ's arms come around her from behind, pulling her back against his chest. "Happy," he murmured into her hair. "Happier than I ever imagined possible." She turned in his arms to face him. "Thank you for seeing me that day in Bodie. Thank you for bringing me home. Thank you for trusting me. Thank you for staying." He kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her lips. "Thank you for making this house into a home and my life into something worth living." That night, they made love for the first time in the bed they would now share, and it was everything Julia had hoped it could be. Gentle and passionate, tender and fierce. Russ touched her like she was made of something precious, worshipping every inch of her with his hands and lips, erasing the last shadows of Thomas's cruel touch with new memories of love and care. Afterward, lying in Russ's arms with her head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart, Julia felt truly at peace. The shame she had carried for so long was gone, left behind like snow melting in the spring sun. In its place was joy and hope and the certain knowledge that she was loved. "I love you," she whispered into the darkness. "I love you too," Russ replied, his arms tightening around her. "Always." Life on the mountain took on new joy after their wedding. They fell into the rhythm of married life easily, their months of courtship having already established patterns of cooperation and care. Julia reveled in small intimacies she had never experienced in her first marriage. Waking up wrapped in Russ's arms, stealing kisses while cooking together. The way he would pull her onto his lap in the evenings by the fire, just to hold her close while they talked or read. In May, Julia realized she was pregnant. She had suspected for a couple of weeks but wanted to be sure before telling Russ. When she finally shared the news over breakfast one morning, his reaction was everything she had hoped for. "A baby." He looked stunned, then delighted. "We are going to have a baby in late autumn, I think, maybe early November." Russ was around the table in an instant, pulling her up into a careful embrace. "This is the best news. You have made me the happiest man alive. You are not worried about having a child so soon, worried. Julia, I would love nothing more than to have children with you. A house full of them if we are so blessed." He pulled back to look at her, his expression serious. "But are you happy? Is this what you want?" "More than anything," she assured him. "I am going to be a mother. Our child will grow up here, surrounded by love and beauty and safety." What more could I want? The summer passed in a haze of preparation and joy. Russ was endlessly attentive, worrying over Julia's health and comfort even though the pregnancy was progressing smoothly. He built a cradle from smooth pine, sanding it until the wood was like silk. Julia sewed tiny clothes and blankets, marveling at how small they were. They talked endlessly about the baby, names and hopes and dreams, what they would teach their child, how they would raise them, whether it would be a boy or a girl. Russ insisted he would be equally happy with either, and Julia believed him. "I just want them to be healthy," he said one evening, his hand resting gently on Julia's growing stomach, "and to know they are loved. Everything else is just details." In August, they had a visitor. A young woman arrived at their valley looking much as Julia had a year before. Desperate, afraid, fleeing a bad situation. Russ and Julia exchanged a long look. Then Julia went to fetch the spare quilts while Russ helped the woman down from her exhausted horse. "Your past stays outside," Russ told her gently. "Come in and warm yourself. You are safe here." The woman stayed with them for 2 weeks while she rested and decided what to do next. Julia took special care with her, remembering all too well what it felt like to be in that position. She listened when the woman wanted to talk and gave her space when she needed silence. She shared her own story, hoping it would offer comfort and hope. When the woman finally left, heading west to start fresh in Sacramento where she had a cousin, she hugged both Julia and Russ tightly. "You saved my life," she told them. "Both of you, I will never forget this kindness." After she left, Julia turned to Russ. "We should do this more, help others like her, like me." "I was thinking the same thing," Russ admitted. "We have room, we have resources. And we know what it is like to need help." It became their mission. Word spread quietly, carefully, through channels that mattered. The mountain man and his wife who would take in women fleeing bad situations, who asked no questions and offered only safety and support. Over the years, they would help dozens of women, some staying only days, others months. Each one left stronger, ready to face the world again. But that was still in the future. For now, Julia focused on the baby growing inside her and the man who loved her so completely. Their son was born on November 8th during the first real snowstorm of winter. The labor was long and difficult, and Russ proved his worth by staying calm and supportive throughout, following the instructions Julia had studied from a medical book. When the baby finally arrived, wailing lustily, Russ actually had tears running down his face. "A boy," he said in wonder, carefully accepting the tiny bundle Julia handed him after she had cleaned and wrapped their son. "Julia, he is perfect. What should we name him?" Julia was exhausted but glowing with happiness. They had discussed names endlessly but never quite settled on one. Now, looking at their son's small face, Russ said, "Robert, after my father, he was a good man and I would like our son to carry his name." "Robert Owens," Julia tested the name. "I love it." Little Robert proved to be a healthy, happy baby. He had Russ's blue eyes and Julia's dark hair. He was curious about everything, even as an infant, his gaze following movement around the cabin with intense concentration. Russ was completely besotted, spending hours just holding his son and staring at him in wonder. "I never thought I would have this," he confessed to Julia one night as they lay in bed with baby Robert sleeping in his cradle nearby. "A family, children. I thought that part of my life was over after Sarah died, and then you arrived and you gave me everything I thought I had lost." Julia reached out to touch his face. "You gave me everything too. A home, safety, love, the chance to be who I was meant to be. We saved each other, Russ." The years that followed were the happiest of Julia's life. Robert grew into a bright, energetic toddler who loved following his father around the property. When he was 2, Julia gave birth to a daughter they named Rose after Russ's mother. 2 years after that, another son arrived, whom they named Thomas after the uncle Russ had lost in the war, not the man Julia had fled. Their home was full of love and laughter. The children grew up strong and healthy, learning to work the land, to respect the wilderness, to value honesty and kindness. They helped their parents care for the women who came seeking refuge, learning early that compassion and service were important values. Julia sometimes thought back to that desperate woman who had stepped off the stage in Bodie with nothing but shame and fear. She could hardly recognize herself in that memory. The woman she had become was strong and confident, secure in her place in the world. She had a husband who adored her, children who filled her days with joy, and a purpose that gave her life meaning. Russ aged well, his beard going silver at the temples, lines deepening around his eyes from years of smiling. He remained strong and capable, still able to do the hard work of maintaining their mountain home. But he was gentler too, softened by love and family into someone even more wonderful than the man who had offered Julia shelter that first day. They celebrated their 10th wedding anniversary on a perfect April morning, surrounded by their children, and a gathering of the women they had helped over the years. Someone had organized the reunion, and Julia was overwhelmed to see how well everyone was doing. Some had remarried, others had built independent lives. All of them were thriving. "You changed my life," one woman told Julia, clasping her hands. "Both of you. You showed me that there was another way, that I did not have to accept cruelty as my lot in life." "You changed yours," Julia corrected gently. "We just offered a safe place to figure things out. You did the hard work." But later, as she and Russ stood together on their porch watching the sun set over their valley, Julia leaned her head on his shoulder. "We did good work, did we not? All these women, all these lives changed." "We did," Russ agreed. "But you know what I am most proud of?" "What?" "Us. This family, this life we built together. The other work is important, but this, what we have right here, is everything to me." Julia turned to look up at him, seeing the love shining clear in his blue eyes. "You know what I think about sometimes? That day in Bodie. How easily I might have given up. How I almost did not approach you at all because I was so afraid of another rejection." "I think about that too," Russ admitted. "And I thank God every day that you were brave enough to ask, that I was smart enough to say yes. You arriving in my life was the best thing that ever happened to me, Julia Owens." "Your past stays outside," Julia said softly, echoing the words he had spoken to her so long ago. "You told me that, and I did not really understand what you meant. But I do now. It means leaving behind the pain and shame, but keeping the lessons. It means not letting what hurt us define us. It means choosing to be better, to do better, to love better." "You understood all along," Russ said. "You just needed time to believe it." They stood together as the stars began to appear, the same stars that had shone down on them that first night. Their children's laughter drifted from inside the cabin where Rose was reading to her younger brother. The sounds of home, of family, of love freely given and gratefully received. Julia had arrived with nothing but shame, but she had found everything she needed. A man who saw past her pain to the person she could become. A home that sheltered body and soul. A love that healed old wounds and made her whole again. And in giving her these things, Russ had received them back tenfold. They had saved each other, and in doing so, had built something beautiful and lasting. The years continued to pass peacefully. Their children grew strong and kind, carrying the values their parents had instilled. Robert became an excellent hunter and tracker like his father. Rose had her mother's gift for nurturing and often helped care for the women who came seeking shelter. Young Thomas was the scholar, always reading, asking questions about everything. When Robert was 16, he asked his parents about his mother's past. Julia had always known this day would come, and she answered honestly. She told him about Thomas Brennan, about the abuse, about arriving in Bodie with nothing. Robert listened seriously, then hugged his mother tight. "You are the bravest person I know," he said, "and I am proud to be your son." It was moments like these that made Julia realize how far she had truly come. She had not just escaped her past. She had transformed it into something meaningful, using her pain to help others and raising children who understood the value of compassion and courage. Russ's hair went fully silver, and Julia found threads of white in her own dark locks. Their children began to venture out into the world, though they always came back to the mountain that had shaped them. Robert became a guide like his father, leading hunting parties and teaching wilderness skills. Rose married a good man from Bodie, a doctor who shared her compassion for others. They built a practice in town that treated everyone regardless of their ability to pay. Thomas went east to college, eventually becoming a lawyer who specialized in helping women escape abusive marriages. All three credited their parents with showing them what mattered in life. Julia and Russ grew old together in their mountain valley, their love deepening with each passing year. They still helped women in need, though they had to do less of the physical work themselves. Their children and now grandchildren helped carry on the mission. On their 30th wedding anniversary, their children organized a celebration that brought together the extended family and dozens of the women they had helped over the years. The cabin and valley were full of people, laughter, and love. That evening, as the party wound down and guests began to find places to sleep, Julia and Russ slipped away to their favorite spot on the porch. The stars were brilliant overhead, and the air carried the sweet scent of wildflowers. Russ pulled Julia close, and she settled into the curve of his arm as naturally as breathing. 30 years, Russ said wonderingly. "It feels like yesterday and a lifetime ago all at once." "Would you change anything?" Julia asked. "If you could go back, not a single moment." "Well, maybe I would have kissed you sooner," he smiled at her. "But otherwise, everything has been exactly as it should be." Julia thought about the frightened, broken woman she had been 3 decades ago. She thought about the journey that had brought her to this mountain, to this man, to this life. "I would not change anything either, not even the hard parts. They made me who I am. They brought me here." "You ever wonder what would have happened if I had said no that day?" "If I had not offered you work, sometimes," Julia admitted. "But I do not dwell on it, because you did say yes. You told me my past stays outside and invited me in, and you have been inviting me in every day since, making me feel welcome and valued and loved. That is what matters." "You know what the best part is?" Russ asked. "What?" "I get to keep doing it. Keep choosing you, keep loving you every day for the rest of our lives." Julia turned in his arms and kissed him, a kiss full of 30 years of love and trust and partnership. When they parted, both were smiling. They sat together as the night deepened, comfortable in the silence, grateful for the life they had built. Inside, their children and grandchildren slept safely under their roof. In town, women they had helped were living free, happy lives. Here on the mountain, two people who had found each other in their darkest moments were still finding joy in each other every day. Julia Owens had arrived with nothing but shame, but she had built a legacy of love. Russell Owens had offered shelter to a stranger and gained a soulmate. Together, they had created something that would outlast them both. A home where the past stayed outside and love was always welcome to come in. And as the stars wheeled overhead in their eternal dance and the mountain wind whispered through the pines, two old lovers held each other close and counted their blessings. They had found what so many search for and never find: a love that heals, a home that shelters, a life that matters. Years later, when their grandchildren asked about how they met, Julia and Russ would tell the story together, finishing each other's sentences as only long married couples can. They would tell about Bodie in 1878, about a frightened woman and a quiet mountain man, about taking a chance on a stranger and finding everything they needed. And the grandchildren would listen wide-eyed, not quite understanding yet how extraordinary it was, how rare and precious. But they would feel the love between their grandparents, see it in every glance and touch, and they would know deep down that this was what they should look for in their own lives. A love that sees past the surface, a love that offers shelter in the storm, a love that says your past stays outside, you are welcome here, come in and warm yourself by my fire. And that legacy, more than anything else, was Julia and Russ's greatest gift to the world. Not just the women they helped or the children they raised, but the living example of what love could be when given freely, received gratefully, and nurtured daily with care and commitment. The mountains stood eternal, the seasons turned, and the love story that began with an act of simple kindness continued to ripple outward, touching lives in ways Julia and Russ would never fully know. But they did not need to know. They had each other, and after everything they had been through, that was more than enough. It was everything. Their story was one of redemption and healing, of two wounded people finding wholeness in each other. It was a story of courage, of choosing to trust again after betrayal, of daring to love again after loss. Most of all, it was a story of home, not a place made of logs and stone, but a feeling built from patience and kindness and unwavering acceptance. Julia had arrived with nothing but shame, but Russ had looked past it to see the woman she truly was. And in doing so, he had given her back herself. In return, she had given him family and purpose and a love that made every day worth living. They had saved each other in all the ways that mattered, and they spent the rest of their lives grateful for the gift they had found in each other. As the sun rose on another perfect mountain morning, Julia woke in the arms of the man she loved and knew with absolute certainty that she was home. Not just in this cabin, not just in this valley, but in his heart. And he was home in hers. Two souls who had wandered in darkness until they found each other, and then discovered that love was the brightest light of all. The end came peacefully for them both, years later, surrounded by the family they had built together. They went within months of each other, neither wanting to be long without the other. Their children buried them on a hillside overlooking the valley, beneath the same sky that had witnessed their first meeting, their first kiss, their long and happy life together. The cabin remained in the family, passed down through generations, along with the story of Julia and Russ. And on quiet evenings, when the wind whispered through the pines and the stars shone bright overhead, some swore they could still feel the love that had filled those walls. Love that had transformed two broken people into something whole. Love that had healed wounds and built dreams and changed lives. It was a love story for the ages, simple in its telling but profound in its truth. She arrived with nothing but shame. He said, "Your past stays outside. Come in and warm yourself." And from that single act of kindness grew a love that would echo through generations. A reminder that we all deserve a place where we are welcomed exactly as we are, where our past does not define us, where love is freely given and gratefully received. Julia and Russ found that place in each other, and in doing so, created it for countless others. Their legacy lived on not just in their descendants, but in every person who chose compassion over judgment, shelter over rejection, love over fear. They proved that redemption is possible, that healing is real, and that sometimes the best thing we can do for another person is simply to see them, accept them, and tell them they are welcome. That was the gift they gave each other, and the gift they spent their lives giving to others. And it was more than enough. It was everything.